Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going deep into something called the new Big Crim. It's this whole new breed of cyber criminal that's come about, I guess you could say, because of all the changes in technology, global digitalization, and everyone having smartphones now. We have been doing a lot of research on this, and let me tell you, it is kind of crazy what's going on out there.
Yeah, this is some pretty wild stuff. What I think is so interesting about it is that it's not just a few isolated hackers here and there anymore.
Right.
We're talking about large, sophisticated networks.
Wow.
And are operating across borders all over the world.
Yeah.
And these guys are causing some serious damage.
Yeah.
I mean, to nations, to businesses, and to individuals, really.
It's scary how much they've been able to steal and disrupt so many things to help us make sense of all of this.
Okay.
We're breaking down the new Big Crim into three main categories.
Right.
The first category is cyber attacks that really rely on advanced technical knowledge.
Then there's cybercrime that's purely for financial gain.
Right.
And then there's cyber attacks that are carried out for political and social goals.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind here is that those lines can get really blurry.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We're going to be talking about some examples where the groups are dabbling in all three.
Oh, wow.
Which makes it even harder to track them down.
Okay, so first up, let's dive into those cyber attacks with the advanced technical expertise.
Right.
This is where we get into the infamous APTs.
Yep.
Advanced persistent threats.
Yes.
Can you break down what exactly makes an APT so different from just your average hacker?
So, I mean, think of APTs as the special forces of the cyber world.
Oh.
I mean, they're incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah.
They're very persistent, hence the name, advanced persistent threat.
Right.
And they have the resources and the skills to break into even the most secure systems.
Wow.
They have capabilities that rival some nation states, so that should tell you something.
Wow.
What's really alarming about these APTs
is that while they may not always directly target the general public, their actions can have these massive consequences that affect all of us. You know, stolen information, disruption of important services, and even sabotage of critical infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
Like power grids, transportation systems, things like that.
Okay, so that's definitely not something you want to run into in a dark alley.
No.
Digitally speaking.
Right.
The research mentions APT-32. This is a group that is linked to Vietnam.
Right.
And has been active since 2014. It seems like they're involved in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
High-tech companies, healthcare.
Yeah, they have their fingers in a lot of pies.
Yeah. What kind of impact are we talking about here?
Well, in the case of APT-32, they've been linked to cyber espionage.
Right.
And data breaches targeting all sorts of industries and even other countries.
Wow.
I mean, this kind of activity can have a huge impact on things like global markets, intellectual property, even national security.
Yeah, it's kind of unsettling to think about how much damage one group can do.
Yeah.
Another group that popped up in the research is Alfie, also known as Black Cat.
Yes.
They're a big player in something called RAS.
Right, ransomware as a service.
Ransomware as a service.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about them?
Well, Alfie is a perfect example of how cybercrime is changing and becoming more sophisticated.
Okay.
They're incredibly adaptable, and they use a whole range of different techniques.
Oh, wow.
Phishing, malicious attachments, exploiting vulnerabilities, you name it.
So they're pretty much using everything.
Yeah, they're really good at what they do.
Oh, gosh.
And they're a key player in that growing RAS ecosystem.
Right.
Which basically it's like a dark web marketplace.
Oh, okay.
Where criminals can just buy ready-made ransomware tools.
So you don't even need to be a tech expert to hold a company's data hostage these days.
Not anymore, no.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to get into that game these days.
The research also goes into APT-41.
Yes.
This is a Chinese group.
Right.
That seems to be in a category of its own.
Yeah.
What makes them stand out?
APT-41 is really interesting.
Okay.
They're known to combine state-sanctioned espionage with just regular cybercrime for profit.
Oh, wow.
They're very, very technically skilled.
Okay.
And they're able to adapt to new security measures really, really quickly. So that makes them very hard to track down.
Okay.
And it makes them very hard to stop.
Wow.
They've been known to infect hundreds of systems at a time.
Oh, my gosh.
And they're really good at covering their tracks.
So it's like a digital arms race?
Yeah, pretty much.
To try to stay ahead of them?
Exactly.
Speaking of state-sponsored activities, the research mentions the Lazarus Group.
Yes.
A North Korean group.
Right.
Known for some pretty audacious heists and attacks. What's their story?
Well, the Lazarus Group is believed to be directly aligned with the North Korean government.
Okay.
And they use cybercrime to basically generate funds for the regime and possibly disrupt their adversaries.
Okay.
They've been linked to some major thefts and some really big attacks.
Yeah.
And their actions a lot of times seem to coincide with political events or when there's a lot of tension going on.
Right.
It really shows how cybercrime can be used as a tool on the geopolitical stage.
So cybercriminals can be pawns in a much larger game.
Absolutely.
The research also mentions a couple of Russian groups, APT-28 and APT-29. What should we know about them?
Well, APT-28, which is also known as Fancy Bear, has been linked to attacks on organizations that are involved in foreign affairs, defense, and government agencies.
Okay.
So things like embassies, military contractors, things like that. APT-29, which is also known as Cozy Bear, focuses more on IT services and public institutions.
Okay.
What's interesting about APT-29
Yeah.
is that they're known to hide their malicious traffic behind legitimate cloud services.
Wow.
So that makes them super stealthy and very, very hard to detect.
So it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the needle is trying to steal your data.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so we've got a whole cast of characters here,
Right.
each with their own unique set of skills and motivations.
Yes.
But it sounds like their advanced technical expertise makes them a really serious threat.
Yeah, they're definitely a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I'm curious about the groups that are motivated purely by profit. Is it really all about the money for them, or is there something else going on?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good question, yeah.
Yeah.
For some of these groups, I mean, it absolutely is all about the money, you know?
Right.
It's just about getting as much as they can.
Okay.
But even then, it's fascinating to see all the different ways they're doing it, you know?
Yeah.
The methods they use are incredibly varied. I mean,
Right.
you've got everything from basic phishing emails to these really complex attacks that can take down huge companies, like cripple them. But then you have groups like APT-41, who we were just talking about, right?
Right.
I mean, for them, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah.
It's not just about the profit.
Right.
They're also motivated by their ties to the Chinese government.
Right.
So it gets a little murky there.
So it's really hard to separate the criminals from the governments.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when we're talking about cybercrime.
Especially in this digital age.
That's pretty unsettling.
Yeah. I think that's what makes this topic so interesting and also a little scary.
Right.
Because you never really know who's pulling the strings.
Right. You never know exactly who you're dealing with.
Exactly.
One thing that I found really interesting in the research is this whole rise of ransomware as a service.
Race.
Right, Cry. You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, Ray Cray is basically like the democratization of cybercrime, right?
Okay.
So it used to be that you would need to have all these really specialized technical skills
Right.
to carry out a ransomware attack.
Mm-hmm.
But now with Reyes, it lowers the barrier to entry for basically anyone who wants to get involved.
So you're saying, like, anyone could be a cyber criminal these days?
Pretty much. Yeah.
That's a little terrifying.
It is. I mean, you don't need to be a coding genius anymore.
Wow.
You can just go on the dark web and purchase these ready-made ransomware tools and services.
Oh, gosh.
Like you're ordering takeout.
Really?
It's that simple.
Wow. That is scary.
It's a little unsettling.
The report mentions some names, Akira, Klopp, and Elf v. Black Hat,
Yes.
as, like, major players in this ransomware game.
Right.
What makes these groups so effective?
Well, they're incredibly skilled at what they do, right?
Okay.
So they're really good at breaking into networks. They're good at stealing data and then encrypting it so that the victim can't access it.
Right.
And then they demand a ransom, usually in cryptocurrency,
Okay.
to unlock those systems or to prevent the release of that sensitive information.
Right.
What's really challenging is that they're always changing up their tactics.
Mm-hmm.
They're using more and more sophisticated methods.
So it's this constant game of cat and mouse
Yeah, exactly.
with law enforcement trying to catch up.
Yeah, and it's hard to stay ahead of them.
What about the impact of these attacks?
Okay.
Like, who are the victims here?
Right.
And how bad is the damage?
It's a huge problem, and it's costing businesses and individuals a lot of money.
Right.
Billions and billions of dollars every year.
Wow. Billions.
Imagine a hospital having all their systems locked up.
Right.
during a really, really critical time.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, that's the kind of damage that we're talking about. And it's not just big corporations that are getting hit, you know?
Right.
It's individuals, too.
Really?
They're going after individuals, their personal files, sensitive information,
Wow.
holding that hostage.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's one thing for a company to get hit, but like my personal photos and documents being held for ransom.
It can happen.
Yeah. That's really scary.
Yeah, you have to be really careful.
The research also mentioned the Lazarus Group again.
Yes.
And they talked about their financially motivated attacks as this huge source of revenue for the North Korean regime.
Yeah, that's a big one.
How big is that connection?
I mean, the Lazarus Group really shows how cybercrime can be used to fund all sorts of shady things.
Wow.
Especially for rogue states like North Korea.
Right.
I mean, they're under all these sanctions.
Yeah.
So they've really turned to cybercrime as a way to make money.
Wow.
It allows them to bypass all the traditional financial systems.
So they're essentially robbing banks and businesses all over the world.
Pretty much, yeah.
From behind their computers.
Sounds like a movie, right?
Yeah, it does.
But it's very, very real.
The report also goes into FIN7.
Yes.
Also known as Carbonac or Navigator.
Yeah, they have a lot of aliases.
What sets them apart from the other cybercrime groups?
They have been incredibly successful at targeting financial institutions. I mean, we're talking banks, payment platforms, even ATMs.
Wow.
They're very, very sophisticated.
Right.
They use this blend of technical skills and social engineering to trick employees and get inside these systems.
Wow. And their reported thefts exceed $1 billion.
That's with a B.
That's huge. They're practically a criminal enterprise at this point.
Yeah, for sure.
It seems like they've got this whole playbook of tricks up your sleeve.
They've been at it for a while.
Another group that the research highlights is Wizard Spider, a Russian group.
Right.
What should we know about them?
Well, Wizard Spider's interesting.
Okay.
Because they really like to cause chaos.
All right.
They target large corporations, financial institutions, and even healthcare providers.
Oh, wow.
And they use spear phishing and other manipulative techniques to get access to these systems.
Right.
Their goal is to cause as much downtime and lost productivity as they possibly can. That way they can put pressure on the victims to pay the ransom quickly.
Right.
Because nobody wants their systems down for too long.
Yeah, time is money, right.
Exactly.
It just seems wrong to target hospitals and healthcare providers.
Yeah.
You would think there'd be some lines that even criminals wouldn't cross.
You think.
But that's the thing about cybercrime, I guess, right? It doesn't respect borders or even like a basic human decency.
Yeah, it's a tough problem to tackle.
Right.
It's a whole different world out there.
And it's hard for law enforcement to keep up, I imagine.
Absolutely.
And now we're moving into the next category, talking about these cyber attacks with political and social motivations.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting.
It does get even more complex.
Yeah, because it's not about stealing money anymore.
Right.
It's about power and influence and ideology.
Exactly.
I'm excited to unpack this next category.
Yeah, this is where things get really wild.
Okay, so we've covered the cyber criminals who are driven by profit, and then those with ties to like state-sponsored activities. But now we're getting to that third category.
Okay.
The cyber attacks that are driven by like political and social agendas.
Yes.
This is where things get really interesting for me.
It does get interesting.
It's not about stealing money anymore.
No.
It's about power and influence and even ideology.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame.
So what can you tell us about this side of the cyber world?
This category is all about using cyber attacks to try to achieve very specific political or social goals.
Okay.
And a lot of times it operates outside the traditional boundaries of, you know, law enforcement and things like that. We're talking about like disrupting political processes, trying to shape public opinion, exposing corruption, even supporting or like undermining national interests.
So it's like a digital form of activism,
Exactly.
but with much higher stakes.
Yeah, the stakes are definitely higher.
One of the most famous examples, I think, is Anonymous, that decentralized hacktivist group.
Right.
That's become this symbol of like online resistance. I remember seeing them in the news all the time.
They're pretty well known.
What is their MO?
Anonymous is really fascinating.
Okay.
Because they're not your typical organization, right? You know,
Yeah.
they don't have like a clear leader or a structure.
Right.
It's more of a loose collective of people
Okay.
who are all united by this shared ideology.
Uh-huh.
And they're willing to use their tech skills for these causes that they really believe in.
So they're like digital Robin Hoods.
You could say that, yeah.
Fighting for the little guy against these big, powerful institutions.
Governments, corporations, you name it.
What kind of tactics do they use?
Well, one of their most common tactics is the DDoS attack.
Okay. DDoS, what is that?
Distributed denial of service.
Okay.
And basically what they do is they flood a target's website or their servers
Okay.
with so much traffic that it crashes, basically.
Oh, okay.
It makes it impossible for legitimate users to get access.
So they're creating like a virtual traffic jam.
Exactly.
So
Clever.
clear.
It's a pretty effective way to disrupt things.
Things aren't always so black and white in this world of, hacktivism.
No, they're not.
The research also mentioned how some Iranian cyber actors operate under the guise of hacktivism.
Yes.
But they're actually state-sponsored.
Yeah, it can be hard to tell them apart sometimes.
So how does that work?
Right. So while some Iranian cyber actors might be driven by profit to some degree,
Okay.
their actions a lot of times line up with Iran's political goals.
Oh, so their own interests.
Their national interests, yeah.
Wow.
And they've been known to target critical infrastructure in other countries.
Okay.
They spread propaganda,
Right.
and they've even been accused of meddling in elections.
It makes you wonder who's really behind the keyboard.
Yeah, you never really know for sure.
It's a reminder that not everything is as it seems.
Especially in the digital world.
Right, especially online.
Yeah.
The research also mentions the NSO group,
Yes.
this Israeli company that develops this spyware called Pegasus.
Right.
This sounds like something out of a movie.
It is pretty wild.
So what can you tell us about it?
So Pegasus is a really powerful tool,
Okay.
and it can infect smartphones.
Right.
And then it basically gives the attacker access to all sorts of personal information.
Oh, wow.
Messages, calls, photos, even location data.
So it's like a digital spy in your pocket.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's incredible and also terrifying.
It is both.
I mean, the software, it could be used for good.
Right.
But it could also be incredibly dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands.
Absolutely. It all depends on who's using it and for what purpose.
The research mentioned that NSO claims to only sell Pegasus to legitimate government agencies for fighting, terrorism and crime.
That's what they say.
But there's evidence that it's been used to target journalists and activists.
Yeah, and political dissidents.
It just raises a lot of questions about surveillance and privacy
Very big questions.
in this digital age.
Especially now.
The research also highlighted Anonymous Sudan, this group that was really active in 2023. What can you tell us about them?
Well, Anonymous Sudan was known for launching thousands of DDoS attacks.
Oh, wow.
Against all sorts of different countries.
Wow.
Even critical infrastructure like hospitals.
Oh, God.
They were very strategic about it.
Okay.
They used social media to build up their brand.
Right.
And then they would issue these threats before their attacks to, get attention.
Oh,
and spread fear.
So it was all about causing chaos and disruption.
Yeah, they wanted to make a big splash.
But their reign of terror didn't last forever.
No, it didn't.
I think I remember reading about them being shut down.
You're right, they were.
What happened?
In 2024, the FBI, with help from Europol, they were able to shut down Anonymous Sudan's operation.
Wow.
And they disabled their main tool for carrying out those attacks.
So it shows that law enforcement is working to track down these groups and neutralize these threats.
Absolutely. Even though it's really challenging, it is possible.
That is good to know.
It is.
So speaking of tracking these groups,
yes,
the research also mentions different naming conventions.
Right.
That security companies and law enforcement use to try to categorize all these different actors. It sounds like they're trying to organize this whole chaotic landscape.
It is chaotic.
It's a big mess out there.
It is, and they're just trying to make sense of it all.
Right.
I mean, you see groups that are labeled as APTs, right?
Right.
Advanced Persistent Threats.
Advanced Persistent Threats.
Sometimes they get these animal names.
Like what?
Like bear for Russian actors or panda for Chinese actors.
Interesting.
Sometimes they're named after mythological creatures.
Oh, wow. Really?
Like Shalima for North Korean groups.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. You can get pretty creative.
It sounds like a real alphabet soup of cybercrime.
That's a good way to put it.
But then there's this group, Lockbit, that decided to kind of ditch the whole anonymity thing.
And embrace a brand name.
They did, yeah. They went in a totally different direction.
So what's their story?
Lockbit is really interesting because they actually wanted to be famous.
Really?
Yeah, they wanted to be known.
Okay.
They built this whole dark website to publicize their attacks,
Oh, wow.
boast about what they were doing, and even make fun of their victims.
Wow.
It was all part of their strategy to intimidate and extort people.
So they're like the rock stars of the ransomware world.
Yeah, they wanted to be in the spotlight.
But it sounds like that backfired.
It did, yeah, because their website became a target for law enforcement.
Oh, of course.
And in 2024, there was this big international police operation.
Okay.
And they shut down Lockbit's main platform.
Wow. So even for cybercriminals, there are consequences.
Absolutely. You can't just operate with impunity.
It's just a constant cat and mouse game.
It is.
With law enforcement always trying to stay one step ahead.
That's the nature of the game.
We've covered so much in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
It's been fascinating. It has been.
And a little terrifying, to be honest.
I can understand that.
What's the biggest takeaway you would leave our listeners with today?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the cybercrime landscape is always changing.
Right.
New threats are popping up all the time.
Right.
A complicated problem. But it's not impossible to deal with.
Okay.
We just have to understand the threats.
All right.
Stay informed.
Stay it.
And take steps to protect ourselves.
Right. And by doing that, we can all play a role in making the digital world a little bit safer.
That's the goal.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Into the world of global cybercrime networks.
Yeah, this was a really good one.
We hope you found it informative and engaging.
I think they did.
Until next time, stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay safe and stay connected.
Stay safe.